Hello and welcome back to the third rail. We have a new addition to the collection this week. I just received this lovely passenger train set and I thought we should have a first look at it together. Let's start with a quick model overview. This is set 2662, produced as a one-year-only series in 1988. You'll find it on pages 42 and 43 of the catalogue that year. It is called Demonstrationszug, a presentation train, and the set is made of a locomotive and a few coaches in different liveries. As was usual in the early days of digital, the set was released in two versions. This one is the digital version. An analog version was also available under reference number 2862. Both sets are cosmetically identical. The set is themed around the upcoming rollout of new liveries at the Deutsche Bundesbahn. As the colours were not officially finalized, this set was a good way to mark the event, whilst not crowding the catalogue with new references that might require a few cosmetic alterations later on. As far as the models are concerned, we are mostly dealing with existing tooling here. The locomotive, a class 111, is based on a tooling that can be traced back to the 3042, released nearly 20 years before. Little correction required from the future here. The 3042 was only 10 years old at the time. So, back to the standard program now. Technically, we are dealing with a standard arrangement here, with the usual motor bogie and a decoder or mechanical reverser depending on the version. The coaches are a bit more interesting in the sense that they give us a taste of things to come. Märklin was getting ready to accelerate the rollout of short couplings across their range of coaches at the time. To avoid having to retool entirely, the approach chosen was to develop new chassis on which existing bodies would be fitted. The first examples of this practice can be found in this set. The long-distance coaches of type ABM use the body of the venerable 4092, and the suburban coaches of type BNB, also known as Silberling, use the body of the existing 4158 and 4159 coaches. A year later, 15 new Deutsche Bundesbahn coaches would be released using this approach. This is the point where I would normally talk about a prototype, but I did a video about the class 111 and it's used on the Deutsche Bundesbahn network a while back already. There should be a link in one of the top corners of your viewer if you fancy having a look. So I will do something a bit different today and focus on the liveries. As mentioned earlier, this set represents a Demonstrationszug, a presentation train, featuring new liveries of the Deutsche Bundesbahn. I am not sure the consist was ever presented in this composition, but the liveries had been unveiled to the public on real equipment in December 1986 during a special event at Frankfurt am Main station. This marked the end of a very long process started all the way back in the 1960s. Up until that point, the liveries used by the company were at best an internal classification tool, with paints chosen more for their ability to prevent rust and repel dirt than any marketing purpose. This approach was a carryover from the Deutsche Reichsbahn, on the remains of which the company was formed. Along with the equipment came the color schemes: black for steam, green for electric, red for rail buses. Coaches were mostly green, dining cars red, and the blue color was also used on some first-class coaches. Similar colours were applied to new type of stock introduced during the reconstruction after the war. Diesels received a red livery, new first-class coaches were painted blue, electrics remained green, but as electrification progressed and faster locomotives were introduced, those capable of speeds above 120 km per hour received a blue livery. There were exceptions, of course, notably the Trans-Europe Express services that used the livery adopted by other members of the TEE consortium. All in all, a pretty utilitarian approach, but the Bundesbahn wasn't the only company behaving this way at the time. In the mid to late 1960s, competition from other means of transport was intensifying and customer tastes were changing. The company was working on a few new projects and felt the time had come to introduce a fresher look. This would become the responsibility of a new design center created in its Munich offices in 1969. It immediately started work on the next new thing. A few years earlier, the Bundesbahn had launched its new S-Bahn service in Munich and the Rhine-Ruhr agglomeration, and it was working on the same for Rhine-Main. A new multiple unit, the Class 420, had been developed specifically for these operations. The design office developed a new livery that would be rolled out in distinct colors on each of the networks. In early 1970, the design office then started work on regional trains, as a lot of new UIC-X coaches were about to enter service. A few of the concepts used for the S-Bahn liveries were carried over in the process, which resulted in what is now widely referred to as pop liveries, although this wasn't an official name at the time. The bottom of the coach bodies were painted in a light grey colour. Another colour was used around the windows based on the type of coach and services provided. This was meant to give a more modern look and make it easier for customers to identify the various services. The liveries were piloted on a mix of existing and new coaches, on and off over a few years. All in all, about 140 coaches were involved in the process, although not at the same time. The pilot didn't generate much enthusiasm, neither internally nor with customers. The image conveyed might have been a bit more modern, but the coaches were difficult to keep clean and the colours confused the customers. It was therefore decided not to proceed and to go back to the drawing board. Based on the feedback received, a more simple approach was needed. The design office looked to the flagship product for inspiration. The more simple colour scheme used there was well known, as it was heavily marketed, and it conveyed certain values: exclusivity, speed and comfort. As a reminder, the TEE was a first-class only service at the time. The hope was that by reusing certain of its design elements, and with a different choice of colours, some of its values would automatically be inherited, whilst simultaneously outlining characteristics of the regional services. The result was a unified blue ocean and beige livery, known as the Farbkonzept 74, the 1974 colour scheme. Whilst not groundbreaking, it was definitely a tiny bit of fresh air and a welcome departure from the ubiquitous dark green that had been in use for the previous 75 years. To further enhance the product differentiation, locomotives would also receive a similar two-tone livery based on the scheme used for the S-Bahn product. The concept was given the go-ahead in 1974 and would become more and more widespread over the following years, ending with its systematic use on anything that did not belong to the Intercity or S-Bahn product families. It was applied automatically on new stock and as part of the maintenance cycle for existing material. With this approach, even the pop cars I mentioned earlier remained in service unmodified long after the scheme had been abandoned. To make things even more confusing, services were modified or discontinued over time, resulting in stock being reallocated across product lines, A good example of this is the introduction of the second class on intercity services, which resulted in a combination of TEE and blue-beige liveries on a same train. By the beginning of the 1980s, a large patchwork of liveries was in operation, with less and less coordination. This diluted the effectiveness of the branding and contributed to a degradation in the perception of the company. There were quite a few additional changes on the horizon at the time. A series of delayed infrastructure upgrades were nearing completion, and the first of a series of long-awaited high-speed lines were slowly opening. The TEE service was being phased out and replaced by a new intercity formula in Germany. The development of the Intercity Express was progressing, with first services expected to go live in 1991. This would result in major changes to the intercity service. Discussions about the future of rail travel in Europe had been ongoing for a while as well, and the powers to be were already working on a white paper that would outline changes to the way European rail companies would be structured and operate in the following decades. The words competition, interoperability, and privatization were started to be thrown around in this context at the time. The Bundesbahn's product portfolio needed to be adapted, and the board decided to use the opportunity to work on its branding. In 1984, it launched a corporate identity program. The Internal Design Center in Munich and an external agency, the Agentur Kaislitz, were asked to provide competing design options. After some market research and a study of solutions adopted in other countries, two options were developed. They were applied to demonstration trains that were presented to the board in September 1985 at the newly opened Hockenheim station. One consisted in a choice of new corporate colors, used in different combinations in parts of a unified design. The other foresaw the use of a single color scheme using a colored stripe for product identification. Both designs used pictograms for reinforcement. None of these solutions were met with enthusiasm, and the board asked all parties involved to work together on a single new iteration. Additional consultants were hired, and a decision was made to work on a previously discarded option, which was to use product-specific colors applied to a unified background. The result was a set of 4 colors: red for intercity, blue for long distance, green for regional, and orange for the S-Bahn. Elements of the color scheme would also flow into marketing documentation and signage. The opinion of customers was sought to fine-tune the color scheme and other design elements. This option was met with high approval rate in customer polls and was ultimately approved by the board. To avoid the mistakes of the past, stricter implementation guidelines were put in place. Whilst it would have been nice to rebrand the entire estate, this was not possible for economical and practical reasons. The most important consideration was to ensure a maximum impact of the branding, so it would only be rolled out where the specifications of the equipment matched the level of quality and values the company wanted to project. To minimize costs, new acquisitions would automatically receive the new liveries. For existing material, this would be done as part of the maintenance cycle. In the process, any out-of-spec stock would keep their existing colors. To reinforce the branding, trains would be assembled with matching stock and kept as a single unit, which would require changes to shunting procedures. The company would strive to maintain a unified look as much as operationally feasible, with special attention paid to new lines as soon as endurance testing began. Finally, locomotives would receive a unique livery to allow their use across the entire range of product families. The color red and a large white bib at both ends were chosen for safety reasons. The new colors were presented to the public in December 1986, and the rollout began in the following years. The liveries remained unchanged until the privatization of the company in 1994. This completes the very quick overview of the liveries in use by the Deutsche Bundesbahn between the late 60s and the early 1990s. This is not meant to be exhaustive, there will probably be something missing here and there, but if there is one takeaway, it is that the Bundesbahn never achieved a unified appearance, and as a result, the ERA system a lot of people swear by nowadays should only be used as a guide. Whilst it gives a good indication of the standards in use in a given period for new stock, it totally ignores the existence of older equipment. In my humble opinion, pictures and old timetables are a far more useful way to find out information if you are after a realistic look. You'll find links to sources and additional information, as well as photo credits for the material used in this video, in the description down below as usual. All these changes were closely followed by model railway manufacturers, of course. Märklin introduced pop coaches as part of the standard program in 1972. Blue-beige coaches followed in 1975. The Hockenheim experimental liveries were produced in various guises in 1986, and our presentation set, of course, followed in 1988. Interregio cars followed in 1989, and the first intercity cars in 1990. Now let's have a look at my 2662, finally! There it is. It was described as new or close to new, I think. So let's see whether this is indeed the case. The box is in excellent shape with only minor storage marks, so that's a good start. Let's have a look inside. We have a yellowed but intact tray lid, but the set is complete with all paperwork present. Good stuff. Let me take the set out. And while I still have the box, I have to confess that this is not my usual first look. The inner tray broke in transport, which is unfortunately a common occurrence with this type of packaging. The locomotive became free to bounce around as a result, and this left me with a pile of minuscule plastic pieces. I was in a puzzle-solving mood, so I made an attempt at reconstructing it. It took me 2 weeks, one little piece at a time. Yes, you can call me sad. I am very unlikely to repeat the exercise very soon, though. But if you ever have to sell something like that, I found that a way to prevent this from happening is to pack the content of the set separately and put it on top of the empty box in the parcel. This might seem counterintuitive, but the plastic this type of tray was made of becomes very brittle over time. It loses its flexibility, and this in turn reduces its ability to absorb shocks. Anyway, let's have a look at the state of the set now. Let's start with the locomotive. Let's have a look at it from various angles. It all looks fine. I can't see any scratch despite its bouncing around in the box. I did have to reattach a buffer it had lost though, but it looks like no further damage was done. Okay, lucky escape here. Now the cars. Again, a few shots from various angles. Yeah, it all seemed pretty much in new condition. Everything looks pristine, not a scratch. Roofs are intact. The couplings are all present. Yes, very nice. Now I think it's time to see if everything behaves as well as it looks. So let's move to the layout. And there we are. Let's check the locomotive first. I shall rail it. There we go. Let me move you a bit closer. Yeah, better now. Right, time for a bit of power. And we have motion. Excellent. Now let's try reversing. And we're moving backwards. So that works too. We can't see any lights because we're in analog and this wasn't a function available on decoders at the time in analog operation. So everything is normal. The locomotive doesn't sound bad either, so I think we can send it around the ground level loop to see if it needs any attention. Okay, let's go. So far, so good. Yeah, no problem. We're entering the station. Braking section is fine. No problems on any of the turnouts so far. Okay, we're back. Okay, I think it's time to get the coaches out now. And there we go. We have a nice little presentation train ready for a few rounds around the layout. So I'm going to get the loco. We'll attach it to the train. Then we'll check everything on the ground loop first again, just to make sure I haven't overseen any coupling gremlins. It's a lovely little thing, isn't it? Okay, we're fine. So it's time for the main line. Off we go. I shall hand over to the train for a couple of rounds now, and I'll join you at the end of the video. Enjoy! Alright, I think this is a very nice set. The loco might benefit from a quick service, I think, but as I am unlikely to use it anytime soon, I leave it until I need to use it for a couple of hours. It's a shame about the broken tray in the box. I might buy a replacement one if the opportunity presents itself at some point. But no harm was done, which is good. If you have made it that far, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. This is much appreciated. So are your likes, shares, subscriptions and comments, which I find very rewarding and they keep me going. They are also the best way to help the channel in reaching a wider audience, so thanks in advance for your contribution. Bye for now.